What do you call yourself?
But I call myself a Michigander.
Michigander, for sure. Because it's gander's hilarious. Like, what are we, geese, right?
Michi-geese.
Yeah. I can't say it. Like Michiganians or Michiganites. Like, it's just weird.
The thing that we call ourselves, it's not something you hear in other places. There's nobody in California who questions, are we Californians? They're just Californians. Or Texans. Or New Yorkers. Or Hoosiers even. Seriously, have you ever even heard someone call themselves an Indianian? Doesn't happen. But here, we have a long-standing debate. Are we Michiganians? The truth is that an overwhelming percentage of us call ourselves, like a flock of opinionated honking geese, Michiganders.
I say Michigander.
Michigander.
Michiganders.
Michiganders.
Michigander.
Michigander.
Michigander. I think it's a weird thing to say, and it makes me go ill a little bit, but it's what we are, right?
But why, though? Why is it this way? How did we start calling ourselves such a random term in the first place? Well, debates like this are what this whole podcast is about. Finding out why we are the way we are. This is On Hand, a podcast that's here to answer all of your questions about all of the things that make us uniquely Michigander. We're going to want to hear from you so that we can find out the things that you want to know about our Great Lakes state. And later in this episode, we'll tell you how to submit your questions. But first, we must begin by answering the most critical question. Why do we call ourselves Michiganders? I'm April Baer. For this question, we are bringing in our executive producer, Laura Weber-Davis, who's got the goods on the way we talk about ourselves. Laura.
Hey, April.
Okay, first of all, what do we know about the share of people who just call themselves Michiganders?
Well, modern surveys have shown that the population here really overwhelmingly favors Michiganders. I mean, you have kind of like official polling done out of firms in Lansing that show nearly 2/3 of folks here prefer Michigander. But also, Michigan Public did this informal poll on Twitter a few years ago and asked the same question. And 90-some% of folks who answered on there said Michigander all the way.
That's as good as scientific for me. You've been nosing around in the newspaper archives. What does the historical record show about use of Michigander versus Michiganian, like when this started to shift?
Yeah, so this is super interesting. Right around the time that Michigan became a territory, the word Michiganian is the word that is picking up steam as how people who live here are defined as a group, as a cohort of people. And it's not until the late 1830s that we see the word Michigander pop up for the first time. But we only see it pop up just like a handful of times in the newspaper archives before it kind of explodes. And not just the word Michigander, but the phrase Great Michigander is what takes over.
What happened? I mean, it seems like there must have been something to flip the switch from Michiganian to Michigander.
Well, it's not really a what, it's actually a who, and it's two people, actually. Great Michigander started in reference to just one guy, Lewis Cass. And so when papers were writing about the then U.S. Senator from Michigan, they were calling him Great Michigander, the Great Michigander. Great Michigander. And this is just a phrase that starts showing up because other Democrats in Cass's party don't want him to be the nominee for president. And so they start calling him Michigander as an insult. Great Michigander. And then opposition party members start calling him a Michigander. And then the insult gets picked up by one Abraham Lincoln.
Stop.
Abraham Lincoln was a congressman at the time, and he was at political odds with our Senator Lewis Cass. Cass decided to run for president, because he had really done it all at that point.
He is the second territorial governor of Michigan. He will go from there to many other high political positions, senator and secretary of war, secretary of state.
So that's the city of Detroit's official historian, Jamon Jordan. And now that we're talking about Michigan political history, I'm really out of my depth, April. And Jamon's really got it from here.
Thanks, Laura.
You bet.
We need to take a quick break. When we come back, Jamon is going to tell us how Lewis Cass got on Abraham Lincoln's bad side and gave us the name Michigander. This is On Hand. I'm April Baer. To get to the heart of why we call ourselves Michiganders, we met up with Detroit city historian Jamon Jordan in, of all places, a cemetery. Elmwood Cemetery is this beautiful, heavily wooded lot of rolling hills, opulent headstones on Detroit's east side. It is full of big names and big legacies. Former Detroit Mayor Coleman Young was buried there, Fred Smith of the MC5, Charles H. Wright, and Lewis Cass. There aren't any statues of Cass in Detroit, and we're going to get to the heart of that in just a minute, but he is buried here forever, right next to Cass's massive entombment. That's the place where Jamon and I talked about Lewis Cass's run for president in 1848, before the Civil War. As he transitions from all these different roles, from serving in presidential cabinets and having all these different, Secretary of State, Secretary of War positions, to presidential candidate, how would you say Lewis Cass was trying to position himself to the voters of that day?
Yes. What he's trying to do is he's trying to present himself as a middle-of-the-road person, as a moderate, particularly on some of the more thorny issues of America, including slavery. And so he's trying to say that maybe it would be best for the people to decide. And we call that popular sovereignty. It's when states get established as states, the voters in those states get to pick whether or not that's going to be a free state or a slave state. Because it's a major debate about slavery expanding to the new territories. There's many people who maybe they're not abolitionists, but they believe slavery should not exist in these new territories that are becoming states. And he puts himself in the middle of this as popular sovereignty. The people who move there, the people who live in those states, they should get to choose whether or not those states are free states or slave states. And of course, when I say let the people decide, that does not include the enslaved people. That includes the white Americans at that time who they get to decide. And he's putting himself, again, in the middle. He's saying that, well, I know some people are opposed to slavery, but some people think it's okay and they should have the right to decide what that state should be, Nebraska and some of the other territories that are now becoming states. He's putting himself in the middle of this, but he's hiding something very important about himself and his own status as it regards to slavery. He cannot position himself as a moderate if it were known that he was a slave owner. And on top of that, Michigan is part of the Northwest Territory. And in 1787, the Northwest Ordinance stated that slavery is prohibited in this territory: Ohio, Illinois, Indiana, Wisconsin, Michigan, and a big chunk of Minnesota. So slavery was illegal for him to even be practicing in Michigan. So he's breaking the law on one end, and he's practicing slavery. So he's violating his position as a moderate. He's not a moderate, he's a slave owner. He's pro-slavery.
So what do we know about Lewis Cass and the people that he owned, that he considered part of his property?
So he's moving them around, but then one of them is here, and her name is Sally. At least that's the name that she's given in slavery. And Sally, he's illegally owning her in Michigan because Michigan, slavery is prohibited by the Northwest Ordinance. So what he's doing as he's rising up in the political sphere, he's negotiating the sale of this one black woman who he's breaking the law to enslave, Sally. He's negotiating the sale of her to members of the Macomb family. So the McCombs, of course, they come here during the British period. So they're slave owners, and they're grandfathered in. They're the largest slave owners in Michigan's history are the McCombs.
This feels like a really dramatic moment in national history and in Michigan's history. The year is 1848. Lewis Cass is making this play for the presidency and trying to cast himself as a moderate. How is it that Lewis Cass gets crosswise with a representative in Congress from the state of Illinois, a guy named Abraham Lincoln?
Right. So Abraham Lincoln is rising. He has not won any major office yet, but his speaking style, his debate style is really drawing people to him. And he's doing some of the same kinds of things, not exactly the same as Cass, but he's positioning himself as more moderate than his fellow peers. And when he will become a part of the Republican Party, as the Republican Party is beginning to be founded in the early 1850s, he positions himself as a moderate Republican. And they're all abolitionists. They're all opposed to slavery. They all believe that African Americans should have full citizenship. And so he positions himself as a moderate on this issue, where he thinks slavery is morally wrong, but he believes that if the states that have it already, they can continue to have slavery, but it should not exist in the new territories.
In this election, Abraham Lincoln throws his support behind candidate Zachary Taylor. And he's giving speeches in support of Taylor, and by definition, you know, he's gonna run afoul of Cass. And I'm gonna read a little bit of this speech that he gave where this term comes up. Like a horde of hungry ticks, he says, you have stuck to the tail of the Hermitage lion, by which he means Andrew Jackson, to the end of his life. You know, he's saying you guys are totally hanging on the coattails of Andrew Jackson, trying to present yourselves as these great military leaders and moderates and populists. And Lincoln says, and you are still sticking to it, drawing a loathsome sustenance from it after he is dead. Why aren't we giving speeches like this now? I don't even know. But he says, in my hurry, I was very near closing on the subject of military tales before I have done with it. There's one entire article of the sort I have not discussed yet. I mean, the military tale of you Democrats are now engaged in dovetailing onto the great Michigander. And he is talking about Lewis Cass. So what is Lincoln trying to say about Lewis Cass when he says, you, sir, are a Michigander?
That's right. Yeah, I always felt that when Abraham Lincoln was saying that he was basically saying, Lewis Cass, you're not even in the places where all of the real heat of fighting in the military has happened, number one. Number two, you're not in the heat of where the debate over the issues of that day are. The issues of the day are about slavery and other issues like that. Michigan is not a part of any of that. You're really tucked away in an area where it's safe for you to be in. It's safe for you to talk about the things that you've done. You're from a state that's insignificant in the issues of the day. And so he's minimizing Cass's significance.
Jamon, does the historical record tell us anything about maybe how Lewis felt about this particular label, whether it stuck or whether he even noticed it?
I've not read anything where Lewis Cass responds to being called a Michigander. So I don't know of any way that he felt negatively about that term, Michigander. But of course he felt negative about the attacks on him and the support for Zachary Taylor. So he definitely felt bitter towards that, what destroyed his chances of becoming president of the United States. And Abraham Lincoln played a major role in that attack that destroyed the chances of Lewis Cass.
For a couple years after Lincoln makes this dig, this phrase kind of dogs Lewis Cass. Mm-hmm. It shows up in the papers. You know, people will say it in reference to him, but newspapers, including the Detroit Free Press, in that time are using the words Michiganders also to start to refer to all of us, everybody who lives here.
Yeah, so a lot of terms start out as negative terms, and they start out as really kind of meant to be insults. And then they get turned into terms that people adopt for themselves. And it looks like that's what happened with Michigander, because that's definitely what Abraham Lincoln meant by it. He was really trying to minimize the significance of Lewis Cass. Lewis Cass isn't as great as people think he is. But now, as it gets adopted by the Detroit Free Press, other news outlets, and the people themselves, the people who live in Michigan themselves, then it loses some of that insulting strength, that insulting bite that it had when Lincoln uttered it in his attacks on Lewis Cass.
Before we get too far away from the history, I mean, we're standing here at Lewis Cass's grave, and it's just this big, imposing piece of work.
Yes, it is.
And Lewis Cass's name is on, many public buildings, and all of these things that you've been telling us about his history. I mean, he was responsible for a lot of really messed up stuff. Right. How do you think about Lewis Cass's relationship to modern life in Michigan, and just what we make of his work and the way he spent his time?
Yeah, I mean, we have Cassopolis, we have Cass County, we have the Cass River, we have Cass Tech that is also named after him. So yes, his name is everywhere. And of course, his name is there primarily because of his military service, and his being the second territorial governor of Michigan, his being a senator, his being Secretary of War and Secretary of State. So we know why. But we've come to know a lot more about Cass. He was a slave owner. We know that he was not the architect, but the enforcer of the Trail of Tears. So I think that there needs to be a revisiting of the honor that Cass has had, that he's enjoyed, or his legacy has enjoyed in the state of Michigan. We need to revisit some of these. No, of course, all of these would not be renamed, but some of them need to be revisited. It needs to be a real public discussion on whether or not a slave owner's name should be on one of the most prestigious schools in the city of Detroit.
Before we left Elmwood Cemetery, I had to know, does Jamon think that we should feel some kind of way about calling ourselves Michiganders when it was intended as an insult?
So I do believe that there is a such thing as reinterpretation of a term. Not a legacy of a man. What he did is what he really did. That's history. We don't want to reinterpret history. It is what it is. But when it comes to a term, a word, those terms, a lot of terms that used to be insults, have now become terms that are no longer considered insults.
So there is some power in reclaiming language?
That's right. There definitely is. Reclaiming language is something that we do all the time. We use terms that have only tangentially related to what the original reason or the original definition of that term was. I think Michigander can step in that spot. When I was growing up, it was a debate between whether or not we were Michiganians or Michiganders. But today, there's no debate. No one still is going around saying I'm a Michiganian. It's almost everyone says I'm a Michigander.
Is that how you identify?
Yeah, I'm a Michigander. But before I'm a Michigander, I'm a Detroiter.
Right. Jamon Jordan is the historian of the city of Detroit. He also teaches history at the University of Michigan. Baba Jamon, thank you so much for talking with us. We appreciate you.
Thank you for having me.
So there you have it. We call ourselves Michiganders affectionately, out of an insult. I'm sure it wasn't the first time the word was used, but it took off only after Lincoln publicly insulted Lewis Cass. A postscript now about Lewis Cass, the great Michigander, this man of military accomplishment and violence against Black Americans and Native Americans. He does not have a statue standing in Detroit. But there is a statue of him at the National Statuary Hall at the U.S. Capitol. In 2022, the state legislature, led by Democrats, passed a resolution to replace the statue of Cass with that of a Tuskegee Airman, civil rights activist, and the first Black mayor of the city of Detroit, Coleman A. Young, who is also buried at Elmwood Cemetery. Now we want to answer your questions about Michigan. This podcast is here solely to get to the heart of things that you want to know about our state, the things that make us quirky and different. Submit your questions, and we may just investigate them in a future episode of On Hand. You can send them out to us in an email or send a voice memo to onhand@michiganpublic.org. That is onhand@michiganpublic.org. Today's episode of On Hand was produced by Laura Weber Davis, who is also our executive producer, and by Jody Westrick. Other producers on our team are Mike Blank, Ronia Kapansag, Michelle Jokic-Polo, Mercedes Mejia, and April Van Buren. Music for this pod comes from Blue Dot Sessions and from Audio Network. Thanks for listening, and get those questions in. We can't wait to hear from you. Bye-bye.